Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Workshop. And welcome back to those of you who joined us this morning for the EDM call. I recognized quite a few names here in the attendee list, so welcome back. Today, we will be discussing a variety of topics related to the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative. This presentation is available out on the initiative webpage. You can get to that page by going to kaiso.com. You'll go to the Stay Informed tab, and then you'll want to click Policy Initiatives, and that'll take you to the main landing page where you can scroll down to Day Ahead Market Enhancements and find that initiative webpage. Again, my name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. Before we get started, just a few reminders. This call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And if you need technical assistance at any time during today's meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. His name is Chris. So our agenda for today, we're really going to spend the majority of the time discussing these 5 topics right here. So we have methods to avoid duplicative payments for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. We have local market power mitigation of imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. Real-time energy offer cap to incorporate energy costs into capacity procurement, variable energy resource eligibility for imbalance reserve and reliability capacity, and then energy storage resources and capacity procurement. And James and Friedrich and Katie Wickler will be our presenters for those topics. And then we'll wrap up with some next steps today. So on the next slide, it just shows where we are at in the stakeholder process. So we are here under proposal development. Our next step in this process will be to publish the 4th revised straw proposal at the beginning of October. So I believe we're targeting October 6th for that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to James Friedrich, our lead policy developer in market and infrastructure policy. And he will start us off with our discussion topic on methods to avoid duplicative payments for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity.
Thank you. Can you confirm my audio?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. Good afternoon. Just before I start, I'd like to just go over some, in terms of how we'll take questions. Both Isabella and I are monitoring the attendee list for hands. So if you have a hand up, I will pause after the slide I'm on to take the question. But we do have 5 topics to talk about, so we will be cognizant of timing to make sure we can get through all of the material, but we'll take as many questions as we can get through. Okay, so on this first topic, we are discussing duplicative payments for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity and methods that we can offer to avoid those duplicative payments. So first, for some context, it may have been a while since folks have thought about day-ahead market enhancements, so let's cover some basics. In day-ahead market enhancements, we are introducing a new product in the day-ahead market called Imbalance Reserves that's procured in both the upward and downward direction. And we're also sort of remodeling what is today called RUC supply and turning it into reliability capacity up and down. So reliability capacity up is essentially the same product as RUC supply today, but reliability capacity down will be a new feature in the RUC process to procure downward dispatch capability through the RUC process. So in day-ahead market enhancements, we propose that suppliers of this capacity can submit offers to provide these capacity products. And if these offers clear the market would compensate the suppliers the corresponding marginal price of each capacity product awarded. Next slide, please. So the issue that we have to think about in this workshop together are that today RA resources have obligations, certain obligations in terms of how they participate in the REC process. and also certain obligations about how they make, how they become available in the real-time market. So today, a California RA resource participates in RUC up to its RA capacity at a $0 cost. Okay, so the market the RUC process automatically assumes this RA capacity is inserted at a $0 cost and is optimized in that way. And RA resources also, to the extent that they can participate in the real-time market without a day-ahead award, have a real-time must-offer obligation up to their RA capacity. And today, RA resources don't receive market payments for their real-time availability, either through RUC or through the must-offer obligation. Today, if a RA resource receives a RUC award, even if the marginal price of RUC supply is non-zero, we do not compensate them for that capacity. Instead, and because RA resources do not get compensated these costs through the market, they have to recover these costs through RA capacity contracts. So now in day-ahead market enhancements, when we're proposing that RA resources would be eligible, like all other resources participating, to submit offers and receive market payments for their real-time availability, both through imbalance reserves and through reliability capacity, there's a concern about duplicative payments. That the argument is that because RA resources receive compensation through their RA capacity contracts, those contracts already assume that those resources would be participating in RUC at $0 bids and would be participating in the real-time market with a must-offer obligation, that all of the costs for these resources to perform these services are compensated through RA contracts. And so if all of a sudden we are now having RA resources be paid market payments, they're both being compensated for their availability through RA contracts and through market payments. And so what we're going to discuss today are two options that we're considering. I'm not calling anything that we're going to talk about in this workshop a proposal, but this is a conversation starter, to get stakeholder feedback before we move into our next proposal in early October. Let's go to the next slide. So we're offering today two potential options to help load-serving entities avoid these duplicative payments as they transition their RA capacity contracts over time to incorporate the market design changes that are being considered in EDAM and in day-ahead market enhancements. So the two options we'll talk about are, one, to extend inter-SC trade functionality to include imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. And the second option we'll talk about is a settlement approach to clawback capacity payments on RA resources. So we'll start with option one. We'll go to the next slide. So option one is extending inter-SC trading functionality to include the imbalance reserve and reliability capacity product. So for some background, inter-SC trading already exists today. It's an optional settlement service that the CAISO offers to facilitate bilateral agreements between two scheduling coordinators. So today, the inter-SC trading functionality supports trades for energy, for ancillary services, and for ISN load uplift obligations. And it's important to note that inter-SC trades exist outside of the market. So inter-SC trades that are submitted do not have an impact on the market dispatch. However, the way that the inter-SC trades settle can be influenced by the market results, okay? It's also important to note that inter-SC trades are entered into before the day-ahead market runs, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the examples coming up. And so essentially what we're talking about here is that we would take this inter-SC trade functionality that exists already today, and we would include the trades for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity as part of that function. And we're going to present a few examples to talk about the mechanism, the mechanisms with which this will work. And the examples themselves will focus on imbalance reserves. But I want you all to keep in mind that the mechanisms will be pretty similar for reliability capacity. And so it would be redundant for us to have examples for both products. So the examples will focus on imbalance reserves, but remember, we can apply similar concepts to reliability capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll walk through this basic functionality, and if there's any questions or we want to go over this slide again, I'll be happy to do so. There's also some illustrations coming up that may help if you leave this slide a little confused, but we'll do our best. So essentially what the basic functionality is you have two scheduling coordinators. You have one scheduling coordinator that's representing a load serving entity and one scheduling coordinator that's representing a resource that is RA the load serving entity is contracted with. And so in this slide, we are saying that the obligation of that RA resource is to provide 10 megawatts of imbalance reserves up and down. So in the first bullet, number one, what happens is before the market, the two scheduling coordinators engage in an inter-SC trade for 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve up and 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve down. Again, that process does not have any impact on the market outcome. It's just setting up, as the market results happen, how the inter-SC trade would work if that resource cleared for imbalance reserves. So after the inter-SC trade is set up, the scheduling coordinator will bid into the day-ahead market the 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve up and imbalance reserve down from the RA resource. Number three, if the market clears the awards, the scheduling coordinator will receive the imbalance reserve up and down payment at the megawatt quantity times the locational price on behalf of resource A. And then, so that's what the market would do. And then after the market runs, the inter-SC trade essentially kicks in, and the scheduling coordinator that received the payment for the supplier essentially pays that payment to the scheduling coordinator that represents the load. Okay, so again, it's an aftermarket process. Good. Okay, first question. We'll go to the phone.
Good afternoon, James. It's Josh Arnold, PG&E. I've got a general question about this process, just to make sure I understand it fully. I know we've discussed some of these details before. What we're saying here is that these trades would have to be entered before the market actually ran, on a presupposition of an award that may or may not happen for a capacity range that may or may not include RA. And that the trade would then be settled after the fact based on the actual results. So I guess my question is, how would this work for a resource that is not 100% RA, who got awarded its IRU or IRD, mainly IRU, I suppose in this case, with portions of capacity that are not RA? Let's say a 100 megawatt unit, 90 megawatts RA, and the 10 megawatts of IRU split from 85 megawatts to 95 megawatts. Of the capacity unit output.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and this is a complication that we have thought about, and we've shared some thoughts about. It's, initially we were sort of thinking we could restrict, in some sense, the quantity of the megawatt quantity of the trade to include the contracted capacity, whether or not that's some sort of system RA quantity or some sort of flex quantity. Essentially, we decided that it might be best, and again, this is not a proposal, but this is a conversation starter.
Understood.
It may be best that we would have the contracted parties, being the two scheduling coordinators, to work out amongst themselves what quantity of imbalance reserves is appropriate to include in the trade. And I would think about it in two separate ways. One is that you could just set the megawatt quantity to be equal to the system RA, or the RA capacity value, so that if the market cleared that resource all the way up to its full RA capacity, all as imbalance reserves, then you would that would be included in the trade. The other way you could think about it is, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing that's not part of the slides, but we've been thinking lately at the ISO that we would sort of repurpose the FlexRA product that currently exists today to also include must-offer obligations for imbalance reserves. Whether or not it continues to include the three-hour ramp process that it does today is to be decided in another place. But you could also think of it as if I have some sort of flex obligation to provide a certain quantity of imbalance reserves, then that's the amount that I would set as the inter-SC trade. All that to say that we would, from the ISO's perspective, it would be a hands-off approach in this option to sort of leave it up to the contracted parties to decide what quantity is appropriate.
Okay. Because that's the other concern I would have with this, is that by making a hands-off approach for yourselves, this puts a fairly large burden on the other SCs. I mean, I look at, for instance, PG&E's RA portfolio, and there's a lot of resources that would have to be entered in as trades on a day-by-day basis. So that seems a little concerning, just because of all the other things that have to be done before the 10 a.m. market close for the day-ahead market. And I'm concerned that adding this as on top of that introduces additional complexity that may not be warranted. But I'm just putting that out there as a discussion.
Yeah, and it's a fair point, and we'll think about that when we go to option 2, which is a little less complex and a little less precise, as we'll see. But good to think about.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Got a flurry of hands now.
Hi, James.
Yeah,
just building on the Stuart Kelly, Los Angeles. Just building on that point. Why can't you effectively, under this methodology, register or tie the LSC and the resource together, then just have CAISO effectively populate based on the awards? Is that not possible? I know it's not as hands-off as you may like it to be, but I would think theoretically possible.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So, and we'll talk about this in the examples coming up, but how the inter-SC trade actually clears, like in the fourth bullet here, does depend on the market awards. So the way, if you have in this example, there's a 10 megawatt inter-SC trade and a 10 megawatt award. We would sort of match the award to the trade and settle the inter-SC trade in that way. The question that Josh is raising is, how do I know how much megawatt quantity should I enter in my trade value?
Yeah, no, I get that, but based on bids, you just for 10 a.m. in Josh's example, he just puts in the bids. Is there not some way then to automate it based on the awards? Because he doesn't know ahead of time what he's going to be awarded, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you could think of the inter-SC trade quantity as sort of an up to value. So you can still receive an award above the inter-SC trade quantity or below the inter-SC trade quantity. It has no impact on the market. And the inter-SC trade would clear fully, or would, I guess, settle is a better way to put it, would settle fully as long as the market award is less than or equal to the inter-SC trade award. But I don't think it would be a good idea necessarily to tie them specifically to awards for reasons that Josh brought up, that it's entirely possible that there's portions of these resources that are non-RA. And so if this resource is bidding in such a way that some part of their imbalance reserve award overlaps with RA capacity and some part of it doesn't, we want to make sure that the resource doesn't have to refund the portion that's non-RA, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You previously had your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just have a quick question. So I know you've laid out a couple options here, and I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about why a third option, or whether or not we could have a third option for us to discuss, be on the table of continuing to maintain the principle that RA resources, and I'm really going to focus on the RUC, the residual unit commitment, not the imbalance reserve. So the RUC run, RUC capacity being maintained, and RUC capacity is not a biddable product. RUC availability bids are, and then kind of just put that on the table of an option 3.
Yeah, so you're saying, this may not all be necessary if you have RA resources participating in the market the way they do today and in EDAM the way they do today. Sort of the status quo.
I am saying that it is not necessarily a status quo. To be very pointed, there is an important enhancement that is being targeted with the enhancements to residual unit commitment. So I'm specifically just talking about the idea of RUC capacity and RUC availability bids are 2 separate concepts. And then RUC availability bids are receiving the incremental moves, whereas the RUC capacity already have the move and can meet the requirements within RUC. I'm not suggesting quote unquote status quo of RUC should be maintained, because the need to be able to reduce certain commitments, especially for MSGs, is like a really important one. So I just want to be clear. My suggestion really is focused on your concept of what are the options on the table to mitigate the risk of double payments. And one of them is maintaining the idea of RUC capacity and inserting those RUC megawatts into RUC, inserting the RA megawatts into RUC as we do today. And I just would like to see if we could add that and get stakeholder feedback on the options to include like the full set of options.
And is that option assuming that they're made available in RUC today at $0 availability? Or
That
just that
correct.
they have to part? Okay.
No RUC capacity is RA capacity, and since that is from resources that are already under contract with the obligation to have a real-time move, they are inserted as RUC capacity. It is not a RUC availability bid.
Yeah.
It's a different market mechanism for making those megawatts available.
Yeah. So how we're kind of thinking about this is that in EDAM, we think that resources, whether they're RA or non-RA, across the EDAM footprint should be participating in these capacity products competitively, I guess I'll say, in terms of that the market will, based on offers, pick the set of resources that are optimal to be used for RUC. And I think that the issue that we're trying to avoid is that we could, put RA capacity bids into RUC at a $0 cost. But in the EDAM construct, that could just very well go support transfers of reliability capacity to neighboring BAs for free, essentially. And we felt that we would want to avoid, have all of the resources within the EDAM participate in equal footing when it came to what they're able to offer in terms of price.
So James, just want a couple of pieces of maybe follow up are, and this is part of why it's difficult and challenging to have like these different efforts that dovetail. So, but for context, to connect, VISTRA does not support that a residual unit commitment run should be performed across multiple BAs, even under EDAM. And I talked a little bit about that in a different initiative call, lots of reasons, including the one that you just said. I also don't believe that I don't think that by allowing the bids to the RA resources to affirmatively bid instead of inserting that bid it should not meaningfully change the result, because if you've already been contracted and compensated for a real-time move, it's challenging to see what your incremental availability offer value is for. It's only for resources that don't have a contract that has compensated for a real-time move that's why they need the availability bids, right? They haven't been paid for that must offer obligation into real time. That's why they're non-zero offers. So I think from an actual practical perspective, you could confuse a lot if you imply there can be offers for availability that's already been compensated in a way that is not super helpful. But that's our opinion and our position. My ask of you is just to be, transparent that this is a position that has been communicated, and that I don't know if others feel the same way. And so if we can have it in the set of options, that would give me the opportunity to see what stakeholder feedback is across the three clearly defined options, including this one, so that I can take that back and factor that in. Do you see what you see the process step I'm asking for?
Mm-hmm. I'll defer the comment about whether or not RUC is necessary in EDAM to the EDAM space. I think just one other piece of context.
I was just going to be clear. I didn't say RUC isn't necessary. I said that RUC run on an EDAM footprint is not the appropriate design for RUC. However, I do think a RUC run by BAA has value, but we should be precise with our phrasing, if that's all right.
Okay. And
this is Brad Cooper. Hey, Kathleen, I just wanted to respond with our perspective of the cost. So an RA resource, it has, any resource, it has, its costs, over a year, there's the going forward fixed cost of having the plant there, and, the things that happen, whether or not the plant runs on a particular day. But then also on each day, there's cost to be available in real time. For hydro resources, that's cost to configure hydro systems. For gas resources, that's gas procurement costs. Costs on costs and risks to schedule gas or not schedule gas on constrained gas systems are different than unconstrained gas systems. And, then there's other different, demand response has different real-time availability costs than other resources and things like that. And so today, all those, when a resource owner is contemplating a RA contract, they would factor in their estimate of both of those costs, because all they get paid in our energy market is now to deliver energy. What we're proposing, we don't view that as a double payment. The part under our imbalance reserves or RUC bids or reliability capacity bids, because we're viewing that as that marginal cost that people would bid in would be that daily availability cost, and that as RA contracts are renegotiated, they would no longer try and include their estimates of those costs in what they want for a RA or RA capacity contract. So that's our perspective. We don't, and we view that as more efficient, because then the daily market can look at those costs and schedule resources more efficiently considering those costs, where today, every single RA resource bids in at zero. And, I think it's reasonable to assume that different types of resources have different daily incremental costs. So that's our perspective on that.
Hi, Brad. It's nice to hear your voice. I appreciate your chiming in and sharing some more of your perspective.
Sure.
And it's really helpful because it's helpful for me where the gap is. And I'll share with you, my gap is I'm very skeptical, especially, and I know I'm coming off of the recent event talk with that informing my viewpoints, but I'm very skeptical that the RA program will be adjusted in a way that a real-time move will not be a requirement under the RA program. And I recognize that there's additional revenues that from a net offer perspective, yes, we can inform. But the RA move, the move itself, that needs to be changed at the Public Utility Commission in order for that not to be, or I guess I shouldn't say that, but a coordinated view between the CAISO and the California Public Utility Commission. And if there's any other, I think we need consistency and clarity that both organizations believe that the real-time move is more efficiently administered through the CAISO's market, through this product, instead of through the forward RA contract. And then I think the assumption you're making might bear out. But with that regulatory uncertainty, I have a hard time buying into it. And I just wanted to share with you my skepticism, and our skepticism doesn't lead us to be able to share the same perspective the CAISO has, because we don't see that shifting. But if it will, loads and the PUC will shift in that direction and share your view, then again, that's why I'd like to see some stakeholder comments specifically on the topic and include this option, so that I can better assess whether or not that your perspective is likely or not, if that helps.
Yeah, and fair point about existing inefficiencies due to a real-time move. But then I would just say we got to think about this also in the context of EDAM, where, across the EDAM footprint, you're not necessarily having a real-time move. But yeah, thanks for the comment.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi,
Yes,
James.
we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, James. It's Sept from DWR. Question regarding the number 4, interactive trade. It's aftermarket interactive trade. You say scheduling coordinator 2 represent the resources, will pay scheduling 1 represent the load during RSE 1 for the 10 megawatt time by price. This purpose for avoid for double payment, is it correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And also, I'm thinking because this scheduling coordinator 2 represent the resource A received payment in the ISO market for provide IRULD. So after market, ISO can consider in the inter-IC trade scheduling IC2 pay 0 to IC1 or IC1 pay 0 to the IC2. It's the same. Is it correct?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, the way I think this would work is that you would have, you have this trade quantity, like I was saying earlier, the 10 megawatts is sort of an up to value. So the inter-SC trade, the way it settles, does depend on the market award and will settle up to the quantity that is submitted. And you could just, the reason why we still have to pay there's two reasons why we still have to pay resource A in this example. One is because the cost of imbalance reserve, both up and down, is part of a cost allocation. So we pay the resources the marginal price of these costs and then allocate those costs, depending on our cost allocation formulation. The second reason is that, as we were talking about earlier with Stuart and others, that it's possible that not all of the imbalance reserve award that resource A receives is RA capacity or is part of this inter-SC trade. And so we want to make sure that we restrict only the part of the payment that is, they're engaging in this SC trade, include only that quantity and not the full award.
Oh,
does that help?
Yeah, I understand the point. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Right, and Sergio, your line is unmuted.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Sergio Dueñas with the California Energy Storage Alliance, CISA. I was wondering if you could go back to slide 7. So I think a large part of our comment has been covered by Kathleen before, but it does seem from our perspective that the language included here basically hints at a decision that the products that have been discussed under DAME fall more into this reliability category rather than in an AS category. And that, I think, is particularly important distinction for imbalance reserves, because with imbalance reserves, our understanding so far has been that if you get an award for imbalance reserves, it's different than if you get an award for ROC, in the sense that for ROC, when you are being available and you're bidding in, if you are selected or not, you're just being selected for being available in the real time. But if you are under IR, if you get an award for that, that will be explicitly for a type of service that would be either reserves up or down. Could you comment a bit on how this distinction was reached? Because this doesn't seem to be very much in line with what has been discussed so far.
Yeah, I'll try to clarify. So from a supplier's perspective, the obligation to provide reliability capacity and imbalance reserves is exactly the same. All it does is to say there's a specific quantity of capacity that you have to offer economically into the real-time market. The only difference between the products, as the way they're formulated now, is that reliability capacity considers the quantity of energy that you could provide in an hour's time, And imbalance reserves only considers the quantity of energy you can provide in 15 minutes.
Okay.
And so they have different time granularity, but in terms of their actual, what it obligates a supplier to do, it's just to provide economic bids for that portion in real time.
Well, I would argue that actually the difference between estimating what you can do throughout an hour versus what you can do for 15 minutes and compensating that through the market will be much more efficient rather than expecting resources to, first of all, resources, many of them have already signed IRA contracts. Like there are IRA contracts that are forward up to 3 years if you're a local asset. So a lot of resources have already priced that out. Now, if this is priced into the IRA contract, which today it isn't, because this is not part of IRA today. IR, this product, the potential revenues that could come from it, is completely new. No one has included that into their estimations. So they would need to first guesstimate how much they would be utilized under this new framework, incorporate that into their pricing, and that might be considerably off. Whereas if it's a market payment, more of in the AS bucket of how we understand the product, that would be systematically more efficient, for ratepayers as well. Am I missing something here? Because clearly this is not part of the IRA contracts today. So why are we trying to fold this in when it could just be more efficiently utilized as a market product? Yeah.
I agree with the point on of being efficiently used as a market product, and that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. But this from our perspective, is to accommodate for, we'll say in the short run, it could be longer, however long it takes for RA suppliers and RA buyers to price into their contracts these payments like you're talking about.
But
and we're acknowledging that.
Like, why is that an efficient solution? Like, that's the part I'm not fully grasping. If this is not part of IRA today, why do we reach the conclusion that it is, and we need to fold it into the contracts? That's where where I want more clarity.
Yeah. So what I'd say is today, let's do RUC first and then imbalance reserves. So today, RA capacity participates in RUC in the market at $0 cost. Okay. And if you are an RA resource that receives RUC awards, you have to make yourself available in the real time, and you get no market compensation for it. What we're positing is that even though you're not getting compensated through the market, and I think you mentioned this in the beginning of the call, that you have to make up that cost through the capacity payment you're getting in RA. And so in that sense, even though your RA capacity contract, you have,
in RUC, you're being bid. In RUC, you bid at zero, which first of all is inefficient in and of itself. But let's assume like this is how it's done. So in RUC, you bid at zero, and you need to be available in the real time, but you will be later optimized in the real time. If you get an award for imbalance reserves, you will be used for imbalance reserves up or down. You won't be later reoptimized. This is clearly a product. It's distinct from availability. No, like, isn't it different essentially from RUC in that regard?
So if you get an imbalance reserve award, you're going to get a payment in the day-ahead market for the capacity that you're making available in the real time. And then if you bid that, when you bid that capacity in real time, and if that capacity gets awarded for energy in real time, you also get the energy payment in real time for that capacity. Does that help?
Yeah, but
So essentially,
not everyone can provide imbalance reserves. In ROC, every RA asset has sort of that responsibility because it's about being available. But in imbalance reserves, a subset of assets can provide it, first of all. Not everyone. So even if people start pricing it in, it will be inefficient, no, because different people will do it. Different assets will be more impacted or not by this. So not everyone can provide it. And it is providing something in addition to what we have today. The paper itself talks about how we have increased volatility, we have different types of measures, even out-of-market measures to try to mitigate that volatility. This is an additional product that these services would be giving the market to manage that intra-hour volatility. How is being reserved to provide that equal to getting a payment to being available in general?
Okay, that's a good question, that last one. So basically, there is going to be benefit to the system essentially, to what today is being procured in RUC through RUC adjustments, which we talk about in the paper, that through RUC adjustments is the way that today we are out of the market procuring this capacity that is used for imbalance uncertainty. And then by moving that into the IFM, the benefit becomes that you can more efficiently dispatch energy and reserves by considering the two together will make for a more efficient dispatch and unit commitment, which I think you agree with me with. Now,
the usage of markets, totally. It's basically more in the why are we trying to then mix in the contracting into this? Yeah.
Yeah. So then the second point is that the issue becomes that if you were to hang on essentially to the real-time must-offer obligation, and all the resources that did not get awarded imbalance reserves or reliability capacity have to make themselves available anyway without a payment, that essentially what you have is you have one set of resources that receives a payment to make themselves available in the real-time market, and one set of resources that doesn't receive a payment to make themselves available in the real-time market.
But you have one set of resources that can mitigate intra-hour volatility and another one that cannot, right?
Well, it could be that, yeah, I mean, it is going to be the most, from an optimization standpoint, going to be the most efficient set of resources to manage the intra-hour volatility. But presumably, for example, you might get 10,000 megawatts of imbalance reserve offers and only need 1,500 of it. So you've got a lot of resources that offered and could have met the intra-hour ramp. They're physically capable, but they weren't economic. And for those resources, if the expectation is, well, you have to offer in anyway in the real-time market, then you have a subset of those resources that are being paid to offer and a subset of resources that are not. Does that make sense?
I mean, I guess I understand that, concern, but it does derive from the fact that, as your slide states here, we are basically pre-assuming that both of these types of products are equally within the umbrella of what RA is today. And I think that is a difficult position. It does have very material impacts on resources, that are planned, that have RA contracts today, and that would be likely to receive a lot of mileage from this type of proposals. We see the benefit of this product as existing, they would be good to the market, but trying to overcomplicate their compensation by assuming that they are part of the existing umbrella of their RA contract is something difficult that we have some concerns with. But I appreciate your answers. Yeah. Thanks, James.
Yeah, I appreciate the dialogue, and I think I understand your point.
Thank you.
Next we have is Carrie. Your line is unmuted.
James, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. So I have 3 points that I hope you can respond to. So the first one is just a general issue that goes along the lines of the conversation you just had. I mean, that's you're taking an out of market product and you're saying you're putting it in a market, but then I would actually fundamentally disagree with that because you're not paying them the market price. You're then clawing back that market price or doing something else with it for 90% of the resources, because most resources are RA capacity. So really, you're not bringing something into a market. You're combining rock and ISM in kind of a pseudo econ way that I think I really fundamentally have a problem with. I think it's the reason why I have a problem with it is because you're missing the time dimension here. Rock has been in at zero because the IFM has already run. You haven't gotten an IFM award, and then it's saying, what are you willing to bid in to still be committed to California, right? You've already been released. You don't have an energy award. What is that value? The imbalance product is saying, what is the value of not providing energy? Not just that opportunity cost, but also what is the risk, the fuel risk involved? What is the risk of not getting an IFM award and locking in my day ahead price? Those are fundamentally 2 different economic decisions and have 2 different prices associated with it. So I really think you're mixing up apples and oranges completely conceptually across this. So I'm going to pause there and see, does that criticism of this proposal make sense to you?
Yeah, so I agree that you're going to have, the cost, what the cost of providing these products are different. And I agree with your characterization of what cost to a resource might look like for imbalance reserves in ISM and what they might look like in RUC to ISM. I think the only way I would respond is, we say that we are going, or, RUC is considered today in the market at $0, and that these RUC adjustments are also part of the RUC process at $0. And because they're part of the RUC process at $0, I think what we're trying to say is that, even though that doesn't incur a market cost for those RUC adjustments, that somewhere along the way, whether it's through RA contracts or somewhere, that capacity is being paid for, and it's not transparent what the cost of that capacity is by having it at a $0 cost. And so I think that what some are arguing is that, although I think Sergio disagreed with, is that we're already paying for our resources to be made available in REC for free, essentially, and we compensate them for those costs through the RA contracts. So now all of a sudden, if we're allowing these resources to bid for reliability capacity, I'm essentially paying for the same service twice.
I mean, so I hear that, right? And I've heard other people say that, but just because someone makes an argument doesn't mean that argument is based on market fundamentals or reality. That's just not how this construct plays out. ROC is a different product, as just was articulated, than imbalance reserves. You are bringing an out-of-market process in market, and the only way to do that is to let the market work. As to whether there's a double payment, right, and I get that concerns. We don't want to overpay for things. That's mixing energy and capacity in kind of an inappropriate way. We have a bilateral market that is not reflective of costs. It's not a cost-based bilateral market. It is a bilateral market, and it's based on willingness to provide and supply and demand conditions. I promise you there are some resources out there that have all their costs plus 20% margin. I promise you there are some resources out there that are getting by the skin of their teeth because they, are original storage contracts, and they really need energy market revenues in and above their bilateral RA contracts. That's just what a market means. And simply because you need to do something one way doesn't mean that you need to break market fundamentals. So this is a huge issue for WPTF. This is something that I think is probably one of the #1 issues of most of our members. It seems like you ignored our comments completely. And so I just really hope you guys take a step back and think, what is the role of the independent system operator? And it's to maintain a fundamentals market. And I'll stop there. I have a lot of other criticisms of this, but I just want to make sure you guys know how deeply important this is to WPTF. And I really feel like a lot of just justified criticisms are being ignored in the design. Thanks.
Hey, Carrie, this is Brad. Can you explain that some more, how you believe we're breaking market fundamentals? Because from what you were saying, I'm not understanding how you disagree with our proposal, because I get your point that Imbalance Reserve is a different product from RUC. And, like you point out, Imbalance Reserves involves energy opportunity costs, which, the Imbalance Reserve payment pays, but, that's the energy opportunity cost isn't reflected in people's bids. I mean, in my mind, I think theoretically a resource would bid exactly the same bid for Imbalance Reserves and RUC, because it's basically the same cost, or incremental cost to be available.
Yeah, again,
the next day. Why?
I think I don't understand why you're even saying that. Like, one is a decision in the IFM between providing energy and between being held back and not potentially getting that IFM award. It's saying to make myself equal between those two options. ROC is saying I've already gotten my IFM award. Do I still want to be committed to California or not? Do I want opportunity?
Are you saying people would include in their Imbalance Reserve bid their opportunity costs of not providing energy in the ISO market?
I'm saying people will provide in their Imbalance Reserves that and the risk. Yeah, fuel risk, other risks of not being there. Just like, sorry, say it again. Why?
Why do you say they would include their opportunity cost bid? Because that's automatically calculated by the market. That's why flexible ramping product in real time, we don't have any separate bids. And it's the same, like spin bids. When people bid spin, they provide their incremental costs to provide spin. They don't try and cover their energy costs, because that's automatically calculated in the market and paid, incorporated into the price.
I think we're talking past each other, because I wasn't saying people would bid their energy costs in the imbalance. I was saying people.
No, I don't mean to say the energy costs. I think you're saying they would bid their energy opportunity costs, i.e., their opportunity costs for getting an Imbalance Reserve award instead of an IFM energy schedule. And I'm saying I don't understand that. Why you would do that?
I see. I'm using that as shorthand for risk. But I think, Brad, maybe you're missing the forest for the trees here. My point is that you have an out-of-market process that you're bringing in market, right? That was the intent of the proposal. And right, you agree that was the point. And now,
yes.
Are you just letting the market run, or are you saying, no, we need some sort of clawback on how generators choose to bid?
Oh, and as a clarification, we're not proposing that this inter-ST trade is for every single resource, for every single award. This is just intended to be a transitional mechanism until RA contracts can be renegotiated. We're not saying that this is the way it's going to work for everything all the time.
Yeah, I think we're talking past each other, because I don't understand why, if you're running a market, you need to renegotiate your RA contracts. I don't think anyone is going to renegotiate their RA contracts when this proposal comes up. One, because we've been proposing Imbalance Reserves for about 5 years now, so everyone has known this is coming. And two, because the CAISO has implemented many things like flexible ramping product, and that did not cause a massive renegotiation of RA contracts. So this whole proposal is just massively confusing to me. But I feel like I've taken up too much of your time. I'm happy to talk offline to both of you about anything I've said. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I know there's a few more questions in the queue, but I'm going to have to move on and get through the rest of this section, and then we'll sort of come back to those questions if I may. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, so we talked on slide 10 the basic mechanism of how the inter-SC trade would be set up. And in the following slides, we'll talk about a few complications that have been brought or that have come to mind. One is that we believe principally that RA resources should keep the portion of imbalance reserve payments that are associated with opportunity costs from co-optimization. So we'll define a little bit more what we mean by that and why we think that makes sense. And we'll also talk a little bit about what we might do when individual resources have RA capacity assigned to multiple load serving entities, and presumably, you know, if they were engaging in inter-SC trading, would have potentially overlapping obligations to the load serving entities they're trading with. Let's go to the next slide. So on the point about RA resources keeping the opportunity cost, it's important that we come to a common definition of what we mean by opportunity costs, because, you know, it can have several meanings in our industry jargon, but the way that we are defining opportunity costs in this particular instance is a little different between if you're talking about imbalance reserves up or imbalance reserves down. So for imbalance reserves up, opportunity cost, the way we're defining it, is the foregone cost of selling imbalance reserve up instead of energy. So you can think about imbalance reserve up and energy as substitutes for one another. Okay, so you can either provide one or the other within your capacity constraints. So if you're awarded imbalance reserves, you are necessarily foregoing the ability to sell that unit for energy. Now, for imbalance reserves, it's a little different and kind of tricky, but an opportunity cost still exists where the opportunity cost we're defining here for the downward product is the incurred cost of selling energy above your bid price to sell imbalance reserve down. So the concept here being that imbalance reserves down and energy are complements to each other. So if you necessarily have to have imbalance reserve down, or you necessarily have to have an energy schedule to sell imbalance reserves down. It could be, as we'll show in the examples in the following slides, the case where you are asked to sell energy above your bid price so that you can provide imbalance reserve down if that's what the economic outcome is. Next slide. And I do see the two hands, and if it's related to opportunity cost, I'll go through these examples and then get your questions on the opportunity cost. So before we get into the examples about opportunity cost, you know, I just set up a very simple diagram where you have on the left-hand side we'll call them two RA resources that are competing to sell energy and imbalance reserves to some load on this system. And you can see the bids above and below the two resources there. Each of these resources we're considering to be 50 megawatts in capacity. And the load requirement is 50 megawatts of load and 10 megawatts of imbalance reserves. And so in the optimal dispatch of these two resources based on their bids is that resource A, who is the cheaper energy resource, would provide all of its capacity as energy, and resource B would provide the remaining 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve up. The marginal prices that are the result of this dispatch are based on the capacity offer and the energy offer, respectively. And so, in this case, if the idea is that resource B is bidding $6 for imbalance reserve up, that's their capacity cost of providing the product, and they get awarded at a $6 cost or $6 marginal price. Then when the inter-SC settlement settles, this resource would pay back the load, the 10 megawatt award times the $6 price, because the IRU price is based on the offer price. Now, on the following, we'll go to the next slide. In these examples, what we're intending to demonstrate is that the marginal price of the imbalance reserve and energy can be based on opportunity costs between co-optimizing the products and not on the capacity bids themselves. So all we've done in the second example is change the imbalance reserve up bid for the resource A, the blue resource, to 0. So now what you'll notice is that both resources are competing to sell energy and imbalance reserves, and the relative cost of providing energy from resource B is lower than the relative cost of providing imbalance reserves. So that's comparing the 25 energy bid to the 20 energy bid. That's a $5 difference. And the $6 imbalance reserve up bid to the $0 imbalance reserve up bid, which is a $6 difference. And so the optimal dispatch here is actually for resource A to be held back 10 megawatts such that it can provide the 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve up, and then the resource B, the bottom resource, covers the rest of the energy. And so the energy marginal price is based on the energy offer of resource B, but the imbalance reserve up marginal price has nothing to do with the offers from resource A or resource B. The $5 cost is simply the opportunity cost of keeping resource A from selling energy at a $5 profit. And so by having a $5 marginal price, having a $5 marginal price on imbalance reserves makes sure that resource A doesn't have any opportunity cost or incentive to deviate from their dispatch. And the point we're trying to make in the with this blue arrow here is that if we were to claw back this portion of their award would be unreasonable because this opportunity cost keeps resource A from being worse off in the market. The marginal price is not based on the offer prices themselves, and so they should be able to keep this opportunity cost. And to be clear, if this were to become our proposal, we would see that the settlement for this particular instance for the inter-SC trade would settle at $0 cost because all of the $5 marginal price is opportunity cost. Let's go to the next slide. This is a similar example, except now instead of providing imbalance reserve up, these resources are competing to provide imbalance reserve down. And now I've switched the $6 bid to be coming from resource A, who has cheaper energy, but relatively expensive imbalance reserves down, and resource B is bidding 25 and 0. The economic solution is for resource B to receive a 10 megawatt award for energy such that it can provide 10 megawatts of imbalance reserves down, and then resource A is dispatched for the remaining 40 megawatts. Now, the marginal prices work out in such a way where the energy marginal price is based on resource A's offer of $20, but again, the imbalance reserve down marginal price has nothing to do with the offers of imbalance reserve down by either resource. It's simply making up the difference, the relative difference of these resources for providing energy. And so we feel it would be unreasonable to claw back the $5 payment from resource B in this example for their imbalance reserve down award, because if we did, they would not be made whole to their energy marginal price and essentially be forced to sell energy at a price that's lower than their offer. One more slide, and then we'll take the questions. Next slide, please. So the basic idea is that we would compare, when thinking about the price that these resources will settle in the inter-SC trade, if the resource is receiving an imbalance reserve up award, you would compare their energy bid to the energy LMP and if their energy bid is less than the energy LMP, which means that they were withheld from economically providing energy, we would remove the difference from the settlement. And then for imbalance reserve down, we would also compare the energy bid to the energy LMP. And if the energy bid is higher than the energy LMP, which necessarily means they're selling energy at a price higher than their offer, we would remove that difference from the inter-FC trade settlement. Okay, let's go to the questions.
Okay, let's go to Carrie Bentley.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. Actually, I think we're a little behind, and I see Callie Wells has her hands up, so I'll yield my time. Thanks.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just a question on when you're talking about all these clawbacks or, removing some of the inter-SE trade settlement, I guess I'm working under the assumption, if you can confirm this, that would be great, that these new product offers and revenues will be part of BCR. And with that assumption, will these clawbacks be also incorporated into BCR as reduced revenues or an additional cost?
I'll ask, is James, I don't know if James is on the phone, but I believe the answer is yes, they'd be part of bid cost recovery, and no, they would not be, the clawback portion would not be factor into the bid cost recovery at all.
So going back to one of your examples where you're clawing back everything except for the opportunity cost, I think you showed an example where essentially everything was clawed back. They offered in $6. The marginal price was $6. They rewarded that product, but because there was no energy opportunity cost, you reversed their entire payment. So you're going to, in BCR, basically say that resource was made whole because it looks like the price and payment it received through the market met its cost, but yet you turn around and take it back. I guess I'm struggling with that logic, if I'm following that correctly.
Yeah, and this has been the concept that's been tough to grasp, is that the idea here is that the capacity offer, the $6 essentially, that's the cost that they are willing to offer their availability for. The argument is that that $6 cost is already being paid to that resource outside of the market through their RA contract. And so it is okay that we claw that market payment back because they're being compensated that $6 outside of the market, basically. That's the argument.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Carrie was saying earlier, just really mixing market fundamentals. I mean, the cost of imbalance reserves, focusing on that product right now, is making that decision of holding back, not selling their energy. That has nothing to do with making themselves available in real time as, part of some of the RA capacity payments. So again, this is another piece of this proposal that really struggling to connect the dots there. So thanks.
Yeah, and can I ask Callie, so what I'm hearing from your comments and from Carrie's comments is that you disagree with the idea that there is compensation resources, RA resources are being double paid essentially when they receive an imbalance reserve award in this day-ahead market enhancements. Is that right?
Yeah, because the imbalance reserve is a new product. It's making that trade-off decision between two products in the IFM. Has nothing to do with making themselves available in real time if they don't clear the IFM.
Okay. And what?
Hey James, can I just ask Callie a follow-up question? Hey Callie, I'm still struggling with what you guys are saying because so say a resource has zero incremental costs that it would incur if it wasn't zero incremental costs that would occur to be available in real time. Just to be ready to run in real time. It seems it would bid zero for imbalance reserves. It sounds like you guys are saying that people would be trying to anticipate their foregone costs of not getting an IFM schedule for energy and bid in that. And we don't think that's the case. I'm not following that, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what you guys are saying.
Yeah, so I think the main point, and we can have additional conversations offline, but I think the main point is imbalance reserve is an energy market product. It has nothing to do with capacity prices. And there are a lot of costs associated. There's fuel risk. There's, again, the risk of not securing your IFM schedule and being exposed to real-time price volatility. So I think it's just mixing those two concepts. But again, I've taken up a lot of time, so we can have additional conversations offline.
Yeah, but I guess that's the intent of imbalance reserves is that should be a cost incorporated into the energy market. Maybe we differ on that, but yeah, so maybe that's our point of difference. We can talk about that some more, but that's kind of the whole point of it.
Yeah, we can agree to disagree at this point, but we can have more conversations offline. I don't mean to take up all the time, so thanks.
All right, thanks.
And when we appreciate the comments and I think we understand the perspective, there is a consensus among stakeholders about whether a duplicative payments exist in the first place. So I just wanted to mention that for the audience's sake. JK?
Hi, this is JK Wang from PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, first of all, James, thank you very much for talk us through and show us the examples of this opportunity cost complication. I actually have a question related to example. Can we go back to slide 14? Okay, so I think my biggest question here is, first of all, on the title, say the opportunity cost is understood as the RA resource should keep the imbalance reserve payment associated with the opportunity cost from the co-optimization. I have a difficulty understanding when you say from the co-optimization. Can you elaborate that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm trying to do in the title of that slide is to differentiate our industry has, when we talk about opportunity costs, like, for example, like hydro and battery storage resource providers talk about opportunity cost as, sort of a something over time where it's the opportunity cost of providing energy now versus providing energy later. And it could be opportunity cost to sell in other markets or something like that. And so maybe, I don't know the best way to phrase opportunity costs from co-optimization. Maybe that's a little bit confusing. What I'm trying to capture is that with the marginal price in this example, the key point here is that we've constructed this example such that the marginal price of imbalance reserves has nothing to do with the imbalance reserve offers. The marginal price is only because there's a relative difference between the two energy bids. That's where the shadow price for imbalance reserves come from. And maybe there's a more articulate way of phrasing that, but that's essentially what we're thinking about.
Okay, that's really helpful because you just mentioned it's different from like the opportunity cost of offering it ahead of time and forego the chance to offer the capacity or the energy later. So that is actually related to my question to the specific example. I understand in your example that basically resource A will be able to keep the $50 payment because you think that's its opportunity cost. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so here is, I feel like what's being missing here, because what's showing here is basically you have the assumption of that imbalance reserve does not exist in the day-ahead market. So because resource A will only not offer that 10 megawatt capacity to meet the imbalance reserve requirement if there's not such a product. But if it does, and you allow it to take back the $50, it means resource B will have to offer it. And apparently you don't plan to charge extra $50 from resource B, or even more in this case will be $100 from the resource B. So it's a symmetrical. You see what I mean? It's a symmetrical assumption because it will be different, say, from a co-optimization in the sense that you actually running a Pareto efficiency curve that you reduce one and increase the other to meet a requirement, but you just reduce one and assume there's not such a requirement. So if you really want to do like what you mean, literally I take by the opportunity cost from the co-optimization, that will be the cost difference of you optimize imbalance reserve and energy in one market versus you do that in RUC and in IFM separately today. But then that will be the savings you try to save, you try to achieve by co-optimize everything. And I'm struggling why you want to pay back those two resources.
Yeah, so I think what I hear you saying is that if the way that you would like to see opportunity cost defined is that you would create a counterfactual where imbalance reserves didn't exist and essentially compare, what the revenue differences are between these two resources, and the difference between the counterfactual without imbalance reserves and the case with imbalance reserves would all be sort of eligible for clawback, or do I kind of have that right?
I'm more talking about a definition of your opportunity cost, because like based on what you're showing here, you are assuming there's no imbalance reserve requirement or this product in this market so that you can calculate it in that way. If the imbalance reserve product exists and the requirement exists as here, if you calculate the opportunity cost for resource A as here, it will be unfair for resource B not receiving anything. And actually in that way, you will increase the overall operating cost. So it's not consistent in a way that how do you define the opportunity cost in this market?
I'm not sure if I'm totally grasping it 100%, but I'm certainly willing to have more conversations about if there's a way to improve our definition here.
Sure, we can take that offline.
Thanks, JK.
Thank you.
We'll take Stuart's question and we'll move on.
Hey, real quick, James, I was clear on slide 14 and 15, but can you just recap why resource A wasn't setting the marginal cost for energy on slide 13? I probably missed a detail there.
Sure. Because in this case, because they've been awarded all of the energy from that resource, and so the marginal marginal unit would be resource B a $25 cost. Yeah.
I see it now. Sorry, I was looking at what was underneath the load for settlement. I get it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so let's get into option 2. I think these slides up. Oh, I didn't talk about slide 17 yet, but we'll stay on slide 17. Relating to the complication about RA capacity essentially being assigned to multiple load-serving entities, essentially we would configure the inter-SC trade to settle proportionally to the RA contribution of that resource to each load-serving entity. So in this example below, if some RA resource has 20 megawatt of RA capacity with one load-serving entity, and 40 megawatts of RA capacity with another load serving entity, you would, the inter-SC trade would settle proportionally to that capacity. So if the resource went ahead and received a 30 megawatt imbalance reserve award, then you would distribute 10 of it to load serving, the first load serving entity, and 20 of it to the second load serving entity. So it would, the inter-SC trade again would settle proportionally to the RA contribution of that resource. Let's move on to the second option. Okay, so that's the inter-SC trade approach. We're offering here a second approach that would claw back capacity payments on RA resources sort of in a different way. So the process here would be first that we would determine what our imbalance reserve up and down awards overlap with RA capacity. And you do this by looking at the resources energy award, and then you stack the imbalance reserve up and down below, or up either above or below the energy schedule. And you would, in the second part, you would pay the full imbalance reserve up and down award at the marginal price to the resource and calculate and allocate the cost as we originally designed. But then you would, in step 3, you would figure out what portion of the imbalance reserve payment overlaps with RA capacity, and you would claw back that revenue. And then what you would do with that revenue is you would distribute it, that revenue to meter demand based on load obligation. So next slide, please. So I'll provide a couple of examples, hopefully, to demonstrate this concept in action. So the example that we've set up here is a 200 megawatt resource, and this rectangle represents, their capacity min and max. And you'll see on the left-hand side that we have this gold bar that represents the quantity of RA capacity. So we'll assume in this example that 150 megawatts is RA and the remaining 50 megawatts is non-RA. And so the arrow points you into a market result, which happens to be that this resource is awarded an energy dispatch of 100 megawatts and a 50 megawatt imbalance reserve up awards. So how the process would work from starting at number 1 on the right-hand side is we would pay this resource the imbalance reserve marginal price. So let's assume that the marginal price is $2. We pay the resource $100. Then we would allocate the $100 through the imbalance reserve up cost allocation that we have today. Then we would claw back the $100 payment from the resource since it overlaps with RA capacity, and you would distribute this $100 that you clawed back proportionally back to load to meter demand. Next slide, please. In the second example, all we've changed now is the size of the imbalance reserve award such that the 75 megawatt award exceeds, when you stack it on top of the energy award, it exceeds the RA capacity of this resource. And so if you follow the process, you would pay this resource the imbalance reserve marginal price. Again, assuming that that price is $2, this resource would get a $150 payment. You allocate the $150 payment through the imbalance reserve cost allocation. You would claw back only $100 of that payment from the resource since only 50 megawatts of it overlaps with RA capacity, and then you would distribute the $100 proportionally back to meter demand. I see a question, but I'm going to finish with option 2, and then we'll take questions. Next slide, please. So a few things to discuss. First, we would have to know which RA resources are part of this clawback settlement, which ones aren't. And so we can track that through some sort of master file flag. And, in the second sub-bullet there, we would rely on the load serving entities or develop some sort of process where the load serving entities would let us know which resources are, have, let's call them contracts that have not been renegotiated to include the new products. And we would develop some sort of annual process around the time of the yearly RA showings for the load serving entities to update us on which resources continue to be part of this clawback settlement and which ones are not. To support the provisional or the transitional nature of this product, we could also include some sort of sunset provision, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, such that after that time, the clawback settlement goes away. And we would want to, in the similar way that we discussed opportunity costs from the first option, we would, even with this option, we think it would be reasonable not to claw back opportunity cost payments to that resource. So let's go to the next slide. I think this might be the last one. Oh, okay. So I'll leave it here on the trade-offs here. So, from our perspective, the inter-FC trade approach is a more targeted but more complex option. It connects specific capacity back to the actual load-serving entity that is contracted with. It does require effort from the participant side to coordinate the inter-FC trades on a daily basis relative to the settlement approach that, from the participant's perspective, is more of a hands-off approach. But, and we talked about, these two options, and Kathleen said maybe we should be considering more options. And of course, a fourth option is that the load-serving entities and the RA suppliers can be facilitating these payments themselves bilaterally. But we think that offering this inter-FC trade approach, even though it is, relatively burdensome to the extent that you have to be submitting daily trades, may be more convenient than some sort of bilateral process that's done without inter-FC trading. And plus, it has the benefit of the inter-FC trading functionality would be set up to automatically remove the opportunity cost portion and can sort of mediate and manage between multiple load-serving entities. Now, the clawback settlement approach is much less complicated. It's less targeted, but it's simpler. The clawback revenues are distributed among the load-serving entities instead of targeted to a specific load-serving entity's contracted capacity, and again, provides from the participant's perspective more of a hands-off approach. So that's the last slide for this topic, and I'll take the question.
Okay, let's go to Joshua Arnold.
Hello again, James. Josh Arnold, PG&E. So looking at option 2 in comparison to option 1, I will say I much prefer the aftermarket process that this provides. I think my only concern with this is your proposed allocation just to meter demand and not back to the LSC or LSCs that have contracted to that resource, to a specific resource for providing RA. And I'm confused by this because I think you actually have everything within your systems, be it through the master file, the monthly RA plan, and CIRA, to actually do a full complex allocation at the time of settlement. Because you have here on slide 19 a really good example of the stacking order. What's RA, what's not RA. That is perfectly clear. I like how that lays out what portion of an award gets paid back through a clawback process. Especially with slide 20 showing that there's an award in the non-RA region. That makes it very clear that that resource, because there's no contractual obligation, is fully entitled to retain those revenues. Then into slide 21, you've specified that there could be some master file upgrades to support some of these processes, such as whether the resource has a contract that requires payback or not. Gren, I like this. This to me looks really clean and straightforward. Though I would say that you'd probably want to update on a monthly basis instead of a yearly, just to support the monthly RA plan process. So my question then is, if we were to take the bones of option 2 and add a reference back to those master files and to the monthly RA plans to identify the specific LSEs who have contracted with these resources and the ratios to which those contracts exist, as you've outlined in slide 17, wouldn't that be a more equitable way to do option 2, let's call it an option 3 settlement?
Yeah, I agree. It would be a more equitable a way of doing option 2. And, I think in the time that we have now, between now and the proposal, we can think about how we might be able to make option 2 more targeted, like you said, where you can actually tie back capacity obligations to, I'm not sure, I'm sure, we have brilliant people in our settlements division that I'm sure can help provide some help on that. I'm not sure on the fly how that would be done, but if there's a will, there's a way. Maybe we can see what can be done. And I'm sure that, go ahead, James.
I say, Josh, part of the problem is that the allocation of these imbalance reserve costs that we're doing the distribution to basically buckets isn't strictly to the target LSE. And then to turn around and provide this clawback directly to them, you can create a separation between the costs that were allocated to them versus the costs that are being paid back to them, which could result in a profiting for the load serving entity. And so we're trying to do, I know it's not the most direct allocation, but it allows for the fact that you will have some other participants that are going to pick up some of these costs that are not directly tied to the LSE.
Okay, I'm not sure, James, I understand that example fully, but I'd be happy to take that offline and work through this with you guys further.
Think about the two-tier allocation of imbalance reserve.
Yeah. So tier 1 would probably be some kind of direct cost benefit allocation, which if we have an accurate association of the cost flows should account, just like IFM allocation does, should account for 100% of the allocations, and then tier 2 would be any residual unallocated costs or costs that cannot be allocated directly back to metered demand. So I agree that there may be some tier 2 that I'm not seeing. That's why I'm saying we can definitely take it offline if you want, because it sounds like that would be a very complicated work. I'd want to see some numbers just so we could work it through, as we usually do.
Okay.
And as James Friedrich said, where there's a will, there's a way. I much prefer the structure of option 2 because it is after the fact. It is solely a settlement process that, to my mind, all the data exists to make that more targeted, and I just may be missing something, as you put, that would allow an LSE to inappropriately profit off the process. And I'd be happy to help discuss closing that loop further.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks, James, for your input.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're finding ourselves at 2:40, which we have 4 more topics to discuss. And there's a lot of interest in that topic, and I appreciate the dialogue. We'll try to keep ourselves to around 20 minutes per topic here, but these slides are a little less. There's fewer slides here, so hopefully we can try to get ourselves back on track. We only have 2 slides. We're switching topics now to local market power mitigation of imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. We only have 2 slides to talk about. A lot of comments from stakeholders relating to local market power mitigation of imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. You can remember, if you'll remember, we had several workshops and presentations talking about local market power mitigation of imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. One at a market surveillance committee meeting, and I think another a meeting similar to this one, maybe back in March. And we are currently, again, these are not proposals, but our current thinking here is that we think it's appropriate to mitigate or perform local market power mitigation of these capacity products simply because they're nodally procured and therefore local market power could exist. Now, there was a lot of pushback in stakeholder comments about this idea that we proposed that we wouldn't have a default bid to mitigate to. We would only mitigate to a competitive locational marginal price. And so we are at this time thinking about modifying that proposal to reintroduce this concept of a default bid and not just mitigate these availability bids only to a competitive locational marginal price. So let's go to the next slide. This is a really high-level slide, but hopefully it provides, some insight into sort of what our current thinking is. We have, to be very clear, we are talking about developing bids that are different than, developing default bids that are different than default energy bids that are used today. So we use default energy bids in local market power mitigation of energy specifically, and the process for developing a rigorous methodology for default energy bids, was lengthy and, very involved. And at this time, we've been talking about this concept for, a few years now that there's not enough information to go off of to know what somebody's cost-based default availability bids are to provide these capacity products. And so we're essentially at a point where we need more information to really develop a rigorous methodology for these bids. Now, our current thinking is that we can develop a very conservative, and by conservative, I'm talking about from the supplier's perspective, a conservative system-wide default bid. System-wide implying that this default bid would be the same for all resources and the same for all time periods, both within the day and across the year, to provide a mitigation floor in the short run as we and market participants have the opportunity to gain experience with these new products and learn about their costs. So, we're not at this time offering up, an actual price, and be happy to take suggestions on, what we might pin this mitigation for to, what price we would pin it to. And of course, we would still propose that we would limit the mitigation to the competitive locational marginal price if it's higher. So it'd still be the same concept as energy mitigation, where you have both a default bid and a competitive LMP that can be the potential mitigation price. And then in the longer run, after we gain sufficient information on the cost of offering these products under competitive conditions, we could re-engage with stakeholders on developing a more rigorous methodology where we can develop maybe a resource-specific or a time-specific default bid that's used specifically for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity. So I'll hold it there to see if there are any questions or comments.
Looks like we have one that just popped up. Let's go to Callie Wells.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I'll keep my comment short, but I think when it comes to this local market power mitigation, I appreciate you guys now. It sounds like you're taking the approach of let's maybe pause a little bit, recognize that we need some more time to come up exactly what come up with a methodology for a default energy bid would look like. And I appreciate the perspective of, being conservative from the supplier standpoint. But given that, I'm curious what your guys' responses to, I think we said this multiple times throughout these stakeholder calls, is why not just cap the bids similar to what you do with AS, use that as your initial standpoint, observe what offers are being submitted into the market. I think one of the previous workshops you illustrated how mitigating the energy bids alone mitigates 99.9% of you guys' concern with IRU offers and potential market power. So why not take that approach? It seems a lot more straightforward, streamlined. It has that conservative approach, and it allows you guys the ability to protect the market against potential market power and gain experience.
Yeah, and I'll just say we're not really sure, honestly, whether, and this is 99.9% how that applies. It's very possible, and seemingly from the examples that we showed, to your point, mitigating energy, which we acknowledge, does help in the mitigation of imbalance reserves specifically. So we definitely acknowledge that. I think we're coming from it in a perspective that, because it's a locational product, we think that we are going to need to have some, local market power mitigation. And we think that by taking this default bid and agreeing to some sort of conservative price in the short run can, at one point, from one perspective, limit the exposure, potential for suppliers to be over mitigated. And by over mitigated, I mean not the frequency with which they're mitigated, but the price with which they're mitigated to. We could avoid that in the short run as we learn more about what people are offering for these products. And we could look at, for example, look at bids by resource type and by time of day or by season when there are no binding constraints in the deployment scenarios to see, what costs look like for resources when there's no ability for them to exercise market power in the way we define it in the 3 pivotal supplier test. That it seems to us that that's the better default as we, first go through day-ahead market enhancements than not doing any form of mitigation at all. And I guess in a sense, a bid cap on imbalance reserve is maybe kind of a mitigation. We're going to have a bid cap for imbalance reserves anyway. I just don't think that we think at this time that that's strong enough to go into implementation with.
Yeah, I mean, I think having the bid cap in there is a form of market power mitigation. And then in conjunction with mitigating the energy offers and the interaction you guys showed that has on naturally mitigating IRU, I think that's the best or the next best step so that you guys can gain that time and that experience and evaluate whether or not it's worth implementing a potentially really complex methodology to come up with these default energy bids, and where the bid cap might be perfectly fine. So again, where we stand on this one, but just wanted to throw that one out there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's go to Kathleen.
Hi, great. This is Kathleen Colbert from District. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Has the CAISO considered how it may adjust the local market power mitigation test itself rather than, so take a step back, not just applying mitigation, but my question is, how will the dynamic competitive path assessment be adjusted given the introduction of the imbalance reserve product?
Yeah, so I'll let George expand on this if he wants to, but the way I understand it, that the dynamic competitive path assessment will be applied to both the base scenario, like the base energy scenario, and also the upward and downward deployment scenarios, where the upward deployment scenario will consider energy and imbalance reserve flows. Consider energy flows if you assume that all of the imbalance reserves are deployed as energy. And then for the downward deployment scenario is the opposite, where you have you take the base energy schedule and reduce it by the imbalance reserve down amount. Actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, we're not proposing to mitigate the downward product. So sorry for that confusion. George, do you have anything to add about the DCPA for the upward deployment scenario?
This is George Angela. There's nothing more than what you said. Essentially, you got it right. Basically, the upward deployment scenario for imbalance reserve up is deploying the imbalance reserve upwards. So you have a total energy flow on that scenario, which is the IFM energy schedule plus the deployed imbalance reserve upwards, and you can still perform the CPA the normal way for any constraint, for any transmission constraint that is binding in that scenario, to find out if it's competitive or not, and apply the same mitigation process that you apply in the base scenario for any transmission constraint that is binding.
Oh, okay, thanks for that. Sounds like George and I are in this similar. Sorry if you hear my ambient noise. I'm traveling. Sounds like George is in the same boat. So I'll just be, I've got a decent amount of experience, although it's been a while, with the DCPA formulation, and I think that this really gets at the crux of, are we going to be looking at imbalance? Are imbalance reserves synonymous with energy? Are they is the market going to see them as providing counterflow to transmissions or not, and to transmission constraints? Because when we look at the residual supply index calculation, here's what I'm thinking of very precisely, two things that I'd like to see if the CAISO could expand on. So my first question is, in RSI, the numerator is the supply of counterflow, which today is only derived out of energy offset. The denominator is the demand for counterflow. On the numerator side, let's think a little, I'm not proposing this, so I want to be clear, but let's all think about if imbalance reserve should also be included in the numerator as supply of counterflow. And I think it gets to this idea of what Callie and Carrie were mentioning about imbalance reserves. They're not really removing themselves from being able to be translated into energy. They really are reserves to be transformed into energy. So that's just the reason I'm asking for us to think about this in more detail. The other thing, same concept, is on the step where we identify the three pivotal suppliers to kind of remove them from the calculation. Are we going to be calculating and rank and then determining the rank order with the sum of both energy and imbalance reserves offers, or only energy? That clarity on those 2 points would be helpful if you guys could take that back and think about it and speak to it specifically. I think that it gets at your over or under mitigation. If a resource offers imbalance reserve only and not energy, you can look at that as they're opting to provide a service to meet the uncertainty obligation and then expose themselves to the risk of that uncertainty arising in real time. Do we think that should be included as supply of counterflow or not? I don't have a firm position. It's something I think we need to think about.
So just to keep it simple, as James already explained, this is really exactly the same local market power mitigation approach that we have for the base scenario for mitigating resources for uncompetitive binding constraints. The only difference that now we're proposing this for the deployment scenario of the imbalance reserve up. In that scenario, really what flows in the grid is energy, the part of the energy that clears the base scenario, plus the deployed imbalance reserve upwards. So it works exactly the same. In the denominator for the RSI, you still have the demand for counterflow. It's the same transmission limit, because it's the same limit both in the base scenario and the deployment scenarios. And in the numerator, again, you have the supply counterflow in terms of this energy plus deployed imbalance reserve, and you apply the same methodology for finding out which are the pivotal suppliers for that sum. And it just works out exactly the same if you consider that the imbalance reserve up is energy, nothing different.
That is, yes, and George, that was my question, and your response was no, do it the same as today. So your answer in more detail there, and just to catch that and say, James, what I heard him say was two different things. So I heard him first tell me, nope, no change, energy only, stop asking that question, please. And then the second response I heard was, just kidding, I'm going to consider imbalance reserves deployment of energy and include it in the numerator. All I'm asking the CAISO is to put this detail in writing in the next iteration. And I thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, and I won't mediate between you and George, but I saw comments like these or things like these in the comments and looked back at the paper and discovered we don't really have a lot of detail on what makes up the supply and demand for counterflow in the DCPA for the mitigation scenarios. So I agree that some more putting it in writing would be beneficial for everyone.
Okay,
we'll go to Alva, and then we'll move on topics.
This is Alva Sparota, PG&E, and this is just a quick, actually sort of chiming in on Callie's point, and sort of going back to what Sergio was raising originally is, I think one of the big concerns for batteries participating in this, the market for these products is the uncertainty about what amount of energy is actually going to be deployed and what the actual energy risk is. I'm assuming that's one of the reasons you're not doing mitigation in the downward direction, because particularly for batteries, that would be an obligation to buy that could be uncapped essentially. But I think the idea of just going with the cap might be more appropriate until you actually have some experience about how, what's the level of deployment of these reserves? You know, is it 20%, 50%? It could make a big difference in terms of what you think is an acceptable bid for a market participant to be putting in on the product. And it could be influencing how they're bidding.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the comment. And again, you know, that's what these workshops are for, is to get some additional feedback as we prepare for our next proposal. So thank you very much.
James, can I answer this? We have discussed this issue a little bit in the storage initiative, because this is related to storage resources, trying to reflect the fact that some capacity products and capacity awards, they have an expected energy content, particularly in the day-ahead market. This is where it matters most. We did discuss the issue that it's possible for storage resource to stay at the zero energy schedule, be fully charged, and provide you know, its total capacity in the market as an award for any of these capacity products. Let's say Imbalance Reserve up. And the issue was first discussed for regulation, of course, but it's relevant here since Alva mentioned it for Imbalance Reserves. So the idea that a resource can provide you know, all its capacity every hour for 24 hours as Imbalance Reserve up means that we don't expect any dispatch out of that capacity, because any portion of that capacity, if it's dispatched in real time for the reasons that you would dispatch Imbalance Reserve up, that would make the remainder of the day not feasible for the resource to have that award unless it is charged to the full amount again. So because of the deployment scenarios in the INDAIM for Imbalance Reserve, we assume that all the Imbalance Reserve award is going to be dispatched. Okay, that's our scenario. That's the deployment scenario. We procure Imbalance Reserves with that assumption. It's the worst case scenario, and we subject that procurement to all the transmission constraints that are enforced in the base scenario. We also enforce them in the deployment scenario. Then it would make sense to make the same assumption for the storage resources in the state of charge constraints, so that, for example, if we think of a 10 megawatt, 40 megawatt hour resource battery that is fully charged, if it has a zero energy schedule from the energy market, at the same time when you optimize energy and imbalance reserve up, you would expect only 4 hours out of the 24 for that resource to provide 10 megawatts of imbalance reserve up. After these 4 hours, you would need to charge it back to be able to provide additional resources. So we have discussed this a little bit in the storage, and I think we need to bring it here in day maybe at some point. I don't know if you have slides on that later on. But there is an expected energy content for all the capacity services that the storage can provide, and we factor that in the state of charge constraints to make sure that the capacity awards out of the day-ahead market for storage devices are feasible.
Thanks, George. I noted that as a noted that as a topic that we'll need to tackle as we move into the next proposal, but I don't have any material on that specific concept. Okay. Let's move to the next topic. Okay, so we're switching gears now, talking about a real-time energy offer cap to incorporate energy costs into capacity procurement. So this is another topic that we've discussed at a few different venues. It's important, again, I still think there's some misunderstanding based on reading the comments about what's trying to be achieved with this proposal. So let's talk about the context a little bit from a policy perspective, and then I'll switch over to my colleague, Katie Wickler, who will present some analysis on the methodology that we would consider to set the real-time cap. So the problem that we're trying to solve is that the way that our market software works in IFM is that two resources with the same capacity offer, let's say imbalance reserves, the same imbalance reserve offer but different energy offers, there's no distinction, or the software does not distinguish the energy cost specifically when deciding which resources to award imbalance reserves. And because of that, we think there are opportunities for resources that have really high energy costs to be routinely awarded these new capacity products, imbalance reserves and reliability capacity, even though these resources would rarely be used for energy in the real-time market. And the reason why we think this is a bigger concern now for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity than it is for our existing capacity products in the day-ahead market, like contingency reserves, spin and non-spin, is because there's a higher likelihood of being dispatched for energy in real-time market from these products. So let's go to the next slide. So at a very high level, what the real-time energy offer cap would do is limit the resources, limit the energy bids from resources that have imbalance reserve or reliability capacity awards, limit their energy bids in the real-time market to some expected real-time price under a high imbalance scenario. So our proposals have been including this real-time energy bid price cap, which you can think of almost like a strike price that applies to all resources awarded imbalance reserve up or reliability capacity up. And the way that we would think about setting this bid cap or the strike price is to the expected real-time price under high upward imbalance, under a high upward imbalance scenario that Katie will discuss more in the next slide. The idea being here, well, actually, before I get into the second bullet, I just want to remind folks that in the previous market surveillance committee where day-ahead market enhancements was discussed, we went over in that meeting all of the options that we considered for achieving this policy objective. And I think I told them there were about 7 different options that we've considered over time. the idea being here that with this real-time energy offer cap in place, if you're a resource that has costs above the cap, you have to incorporate this risk of being dispatched for energy in real time at a price below your cost into your imbalance reserve and reliability capacity bid. That means that for those resources that have higher energy costs naturally, they're going to be bidding higher for reliability capacity up and imbalance reserve up. That means they'll be less likely to be awarded, and therefore it meets our policy objective of trying not to have these high energy cost resources routinely awarded these capacity products. Now, we'll note that the quantity of the real-time energy bids that are subject to the energy bid cap are limited to the megawatt quantity of the imbalance reserve up or reliability capacity up awards. So for example, if you get a 50 megawatt imbalance reserve up award, and you also have a 50 megawatt energy schedule from the day-ahead market, then only the 50 megawatt portion of your real-time bid is subject to being below this offer cap, and the remaining 50 can be offered in as the resource pleases. So with that, I'm gonna, I'll take a question from Kathleen on sort of the policy idea, and then we'll transition over to Katie to talk about some analysis on how we propose to set the cap.
Thanks, James. Real briefly, Kathleen from Vistra. So you piqued my interest when you said that you were thinking that the opportunity, like the risk is that real-time prices would come in below your cost, and so that seems like a key assumption you're making when you're evaluating this policy statement. Is that, did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, so I'll give a really sort of absurd example to try to illustrate what I mean. Imagine you are a resource that has underlying costs of providing energy at like $999. And the real-time bid cap that it's not on this slide, and I should have put it on the slide, and I apologize. But this real-time bid cap would be known to market participants in the day-ahead time frame. So imagine that this real-time bid cap is $100 or something like that, and you have underlying costs that are $999. That means that if you are bidding for imbalance reserves or reliability capacity, and you receive one of those awards, you are going to be obligated in real time to offer that energy at $100 or lower, which is a lot lower than your underlying costs. And the only way to prevent you from being put in that situation is either not offering the imbalance reserve or reliability capacity at all, or you have to price in the risk in your day-ahead capacity bid of being subject to that cap that would make you, if you're dispatched, make you sell energy below your cost. So in that sense, it's sort of, the reason I put strike price there is almost as if the ISO is exercising an option to buy energy from these resources at a predetermined strike price if the real-time price goes above that. I hope that makes it clear.
Can you go through the numbers? So you said the real-time, let's say the real-time cap's 100. You said cost at $999. So you're basically saying that your perspective is that entities look at it as my risk is $899 downside going into real-time. And so I guess where I'm a little thinking, are you suggest, because I see this as about a cap, but then I hear your words implying a make-whole payment of $899 to make them whole for their cost. And so maybe that's where I'm getting lost.
Yeah, I mean, from the bidder's perspective, it's not a make-whole payment from the market operator's perspective. It's a make-whole. They have to bid, $899 maybe is the bid adder that they need to include in their bid in order to make themselves whole. And so the cap incentivizes them to incorporate that into their bids themselves. And obviously, $899 is a silly example because that's above the imbalance reserve cap anyway, but I was trying to be provide an obnoxious example to make the, you know,
No.
the incentives clear that if you have costs, underlying costs that you're going to be, you know, in the real time subject to some sort of cap and your costs are above that cap, then you would need to price in that risk into your capacity bid.
I don't think it's an obnoxious example. I think it's a great example. So no, thank you for doing that. I just wanted to let you know that the way that I think about the opportunity cost is not as a delta between cost and the real-time cap, but as a delta between your expectations of the day-ahead clearing price and the real-time cap. Because your opportunity cost is whether or not you're exposed to the day-ahead clearing price, or if you're willing to move your exposure into real time and take that risk. So if you have relatively low, like there's that risk associated with the uncertainty not arising in real time, which you would need to consider as a part of an offer price. But then to your point, if you know about a cap, then you're being incentivized to have to cover your actual operating costs as well, which could be higher or lower depending on kind of what you think might happen. That's all to say that honestly, 250 has never sounded accurate to me as a cap on imbalance reserves. As we talk through this example, I think it's clear why. Because especially with this type of real-time cap, you're right. You're distorting the signal and the incentives for how entities would offer in the day ahead. If that is what you think is best, I think that you also need to consider and acknowledge that the imbalance reserve cap then is far, far too low.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I'll take that point.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, looks like 2 more questions popped up. Should we go to Jeff Spires?
Hi, James. It's Jeff Spires with PowerX. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. I just wanted to give you some feedback on this idea. First of all, we share the concern that you're raising, and I think it's important to consider some kind of methodology to differentiate resources based on their energy price, because, you know, as you were pointing out, you know, otherwise I think you can get inefficient outcomes to the extent that you're providing imbalance reserve awards to resources that have a relatively high energy cost when you know that it is likely that you're going to need them in real time for at least some amount of the time. So I agree with the way that you described that and the difference in that concern relative to something like contingency reserves, where the expectation is not that you're going to deploy those resources, or at least not frequently enough for the underlying energy cost to be that relevant. So I do think this is important. And I think the concept here that you're considering of basically providing some kind of price signal for participants to then factor into their imbalance reserve offer prices also makes sense. But one area that I think would be a significant improvement is to separate that concept, move away from a real-time offer cap on the physical resource, and instead implement something similar financially through the settlement. And so basically what I'm suggesting is that an entity that receives an imbalance reserve would have a financial exposure in a similar way to what you were describing. So much like kind of an option style settlement, where they would have a financial exposure to the difference between the real-time price and some predetermined strike price that might be, you know, whatever it is based on the P97.5 level, et cetera. But the point being, rather than making it an offer cap on the physical resource, making that a financial exposure achieves the same effect because the entity looking ahead will say, okay, I know I've got this financial exposure if and if my resource cost is above that strike price, so I need to factor that into whether or not I'm willing to make an imbalance reserve offer and at what level. But what it avoids is actually putting a cap on that resource's cost in real time, because I think that has a distortion or could potentially distort the real-time price, because you're asking the resource to actually physically offer its supply below its cost. And I think you'd get a more efficient outcome by separating those two concepts and saying we can achieve what we're trying to do with a financial settlement that's applicable to that resource, but then they're still incented physically to offer in at their actual cost, and not end up in a situation where you're kind of getting the dispatch wrong or potentially impacting the price formation in real time because there's this clear separation between the financial outcomes and the physical dispatch.
I'm intrigued by the idea that we could implement something similar in concept that would sort of prevent or keep the incentive for market participants to be offering energy at their cost in the real-time market. And I don't know that I grasped 100% of your idea, but I would love to, chat about this more and see if we can make something out of it.
Okay, that sounds good. We can take it offline, but I mean, the concept is essentially that you have that financial exposure that you were describing is defined by the entity's understanding of whatever that strike price is against the real-time price. So if the real-time price is above that strike price, then they have that exposure, and that's completely independent from whether or not their resource is dispatched. So then their incentive, if they want to hedge that exposure, they want to offer their resource at their cost and deliver energy to receive the real-time price, so that the outcome is that they're selling at the real-time price, but then they're also paying this financial charge that is the delta between the real-time price and the day-ahead strike price. So the net effect is effectively that they're on a net basis receiving the day-ahead strike price for their energy, but you're not actually lowering or forcing them to put their physical supply in at a price that doesn't reflect their cost. So maybe we could take that offline and have some further discussion about that.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe if I could just at a very high level, where the option on the screen here is having them base their, I'll call it their cost exposure into their bid. Cost exposure meaning I'm prevented from potentially prevented from offering energy at my cost in real time. And your idea is more of price exposure, where it's not looking at the strike price compared to your cost, it's looking at strike price compared to the expected real-time price, essentially. Is that at a high level kind of getting it?
Yes, but what that'll do is that'll mean that for entities that have a cost that is relatively high, they won't be able to fully cover that exposure, and so they'll factor that into their offer for the imbalance reserve product. So I think it achieves a similar outcome, or almost the same financial outcome when you combine the physical transaction and the financial exposure. I think it gets you to a similar place.
Okay, yeah, look forward to talking about it some more.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Stuart?
Thanks, James. Maybe you can help me with this one. I understand the issue, and I understand how you're trying to mitigate it, but it's built on the premise that the costs are higher. Is there not, have you considered where it may be appropriate in certain scenarios to have an energy bid higher than the imbalance reserve bid. And it shouldn't be mitigated in the way that you're proposing. I'm just trying to contemplate, potential scenarios in my own mind where that may be appropriate because a probability of the imbalance reserve making you run or whatever, but you don't really want to run it for energy purposes. Have you considered scenarios where the energy should be higher than the imbalance reserve, other than just for cost purposes?
Yeah, so the first point I want to make is that you're right that the cap is meaningless for resources that are offering and have costs below it, right? So
right.
if the the cap is $1,000, or that's silly, $900. There's only a really small subset of resources that this cap would have any effect on. And so what we're actually going to talk about in the next couple of slides is it's really a methodology question about how the price cap is set. And I think that from a policy perspective, I think that we would, there's a trade-off here. If you set the price cap too high, it becomes more and more meaningless because less and less resource, it applies to less and less, or I should say, fewer and fewer resources. But if you set the price cap too low, then it is too many resources essentially are offering in their imbalance reserve costs, incorporating this price risk, and then the potential becomes that the marginal cost of the imbalance reserve product is just not based on the marginal cost of being available for imbalance reserves. It becomes based on something else. And I think between those two trade-offs, we would rather be a little more conservative, meaning that we would prefer to have the cap be a little bit higher than, like you're saying, because one, it provides us a little bit of a buffer that if imbalance ends up, exceeding the quantity, let's say the 97.5 percentile, we'll have a little bit of buffer in there that, we'll still be able to have those resources in the market. But it also really comes down to, I can't highlight the bullets, but it comes down to the original objective, which is to prevent really high energy cost resources from systematically receiving imbalance reserve or reliability capacity awards. They pocket the payment and then they're never used for real-time energy. And if they are, they're used at really expensive price. So maybe let's keep that in mind. Is that kind of making sense?
It completely makes sense. And I guess to the one point you highlighted is you're trying to prevent systematic behavior. So I'll bear that in mind and contemplate it as you get through the next set of slides. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to pass the torch to Katie, who's going to go over the next few slides.
There, just confirming you can hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Great. And I just got the unfortunately timed notification that my headphones are dying. So if I have to switch audio, apologize for the quality if that happens. Hi, good afternoon. This is Katie Wickler. I'm with the market analysis team here at the CAISO. Just wanted to quickly go through a couple slides talking about some of the analysis that we did on some calculation methodology options for this real-time energy offer cap that James just teed up. Here our objective was to find a way to calculate this real-time energy offer cap at an hourly or a daily granularity that would be available prior to the close of the day-ahead market bidding window. And so our analysis explored a quantile regression using historical data to predict the next day's real-time energy offer cap. So some of the regressors we looked at here were CAISO net load and natural gas commodity prices. The historical data we pulled in were the simple average of the 15-minute market DLAPs, the four DLAPs that are in the CAISO area. So just a little bit more foundational background here. Quantile regression, what we mean by that is a regression that that estimates quantiles of the dependent variable conditional on the independent variable. So choosing a particular quantile, for example, the 97.5th or the 90th, will predict values that are expected to be greater than the corresponding percent of that data. So the regression will derive coefficients based on historical data, in this case, historical pricing data, and those coefficients are then used in a linear or a quadratic equation multiplied by an independent variable, such as gas price or net load, to obtain a projected price. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so here I just wanted to provide kind of a brief overview of the regression sort of process flow with this top graphic here. So when exploring the different ways to structure the regression, we had to set up certain features at the outset, like which variable would be the regressor, whether that's gas price or net load or maybe both, what amount of historical data to consider, that's the look back period there, and then any other sort of pre-regression data treatments, like treatment of outliers. So I'll note here the notation that we use for this look back period option. This indicates how many days backwards from the trading date and how many days forward from the trading date from the previous year were used and considered in the regression. So I'll give kind of a quick example to make sense of that. So for a look back period of 30/30, that would, if we're using that to calculate the cap for trading day, let's say August 31st, 2022, the regression would consider data from 30 days backwards, so August 1st through August 30th, 2022, as well as 30 days forward from the previous year, August 31st through, that would be, I think, September 29th, 2021. So a bit of a, pulling in some data, historical data, and while attempting to maintain some sense of seasonality there. So the next step was to sort of tune the regression a little bit further. So we needed to specify whether the formula was linear or quadratic. And we also needed to choose the quantile, whether that would be the 97.5th quantile, the 90th quantile, or some other value. There were some additional considerations we made with respect to the data granularity, the granularity of the historical price data itself, whether to keep that in 15-minute increments or average across the hours. So really kind of getting into the nuances of how we can tune this regression. And then we ran the regression with the specified features. We ran through a variety of different combinations of these options here. And the output was a projected energy offer cap. And so we looked at that either at a daily granularity, so that would be one value for the entire day, or at an hourly granularity, so one value for per each hour, depending on the specified regression. There were some additional treatments we considered as well, like applying a numerical scalar to the output offer cap, so scaling the values up by a certain scalar, or differentiating between weekends and weekdays within the regression itself. So the table here, I'm just kind of attempting to show an example of the various combinations and permutations of the different features that we explored. This is, by no means a comprehensive list, just more of an example here. And we are planning to publish sort of a companion analysis to this in paper format that will explore all of these different methodologies in much greater detail. So you can look for that for more details there. Let's go to the next slide, please. Great. So after crafting the various sort of regression methodologies and crunching the numbers, we wanted to really find a standardized set of metrics by which to evaluate the performance of all of these different methodologies. So what we essentially did was perform a counterfactual analysis on the first 6 months of the year of 2022, where we applied the various methodologies to all of the trading days within those months, and then compared the resulting projected energy offer cap with how real-time prices actually materialized, to sort of give a sense of how well or how poorly the methodology performed now that we could compare to actual realized prices. So we looked at 4 metrics, and I described them here. Coverage represents the percentage of time that the projected cap was sufficient to cover the actual FMM price. So the percentage that the cap was at least equal to, if not greater than, the actual price that we saw in the first 6 months of the year. The difference, this metric is essentially the delta between the projected cap and the actual price. So when we see a positive difference value, that would indicate that the projected cap covers and is actually greater than the actual price. A difference metric of 0, that would mean that the two are perfectly equivalent. Closeness, this is just the absolute difference between the projected cap and the price, the actual FMM price. And then finally, scale. Scale is the ratio of the actual realized prices to the projected bid cap. So a scale value of less than 1 would indicate that the projected cap covers the actual FMM price and is actually a little bit greater than the price there. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll try and tie this all together here. So I wanted to show some observed results for just one of the methodologies. And this is sort of, not to get too into the weeds here, but this is more to provide a representative example of what we were looking for in this analysis, just to kind of highlight some of the things that we were keeping an eye out for when we tried to assess how well these different methodologies were working. So this is one methodology we explored that uses, within the quantile regression formulation, it uses a linear formula. It uses average gas price as the regressor, and so that would be, in this case, we took the simple average between the PG&E and the SoCal City Gate prices at the 97.5th quantile, and we used a look-back period of 60 days prior to the trading date for those historical FMM prices, and then 60 days forward from the trading date from the previous year. So here on the left side, we show, for the first 6 months of 2022, we show some box plots of the difference metric. So just as a reminder, the difference is essentially the delta between the projected cap from the regression and the actual real-time FMM price for that hour. So the box itself will show the interquartile range of the data. So that shows the 25th to the 75th percentile of the data. And then the line in the center, of course, being the median from the data set. And then the dots will also show you the outliers outside of that range. So the way to look at this, a longer or a taller box, if you will, indicates that there was a little more variability between the projected cap and the actual price, whereas a box that's a little more squished down shows that the projected cap was relatively close to the FMM price that materialized for the trade hours across each month. So without going into too many specifics of what we're seeing here, what we generally looked for when we compared all these methodologies was something that would minimize this difference metric while still providing an appropriate level of coverage. So coverage, again, being that percentage of time throughout the month that the projected cap was sufficient to cover the actual FMM price that materialized. We also looked for methodologies that achieved a scale value of, as close to 1 as we could get it, but still less than 1. So as I mentioned previously, scale, that's the ratio of that actual FMM price to the projected cap. And it's a helpful kind of complement to the coverage metric here to tell us just by how much the projected cap would exceed or was short of the projected price on average. And again, these metrics are sort of averaged across the month, so that sort of absorbs some of the variability that we might observe if we break these metrics down, on a day-by-day or an hour-by-hour basis. But, again, still helpful to see kind of broadly across the month how this played out. One final note here, I just wanted to mention how, certain historical prices, high prices can impact the regression results. So, by its very nature, the regression has to pull in some amount of historical data, and that may influence how the regression plays out. So, for example, the difference metric you can see in the middle box plot on the right, that's for the month of April 2022. you can see in hour ending 20, the box there has a much wider range than other hours. And you know, this is, if you think about the look back period here, we're pulling in historical data from the past, you know, 2 months in 2022, and then the 2 months forward in 2021. So we're kind of picking up some higher priced periods that materialized earlier this year in April, as well as last year in July. And so, you know, those outliers can influence how the regression sort of outputs, especially when we're looking at these higher quantiles. So just wanted to mention that there. I think this is all that I have in terms of my slides. You know, as I mentioned, we are planning to publish sort of a companion report with many more details about this. So we'll have those details there as well. But I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to James.
Like we have 2 questions. Go to Kathleen.
Thanks. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Katie, can you just repeat? So the FMM LMPs that you're using, those are projected LMPs?
So in the regression, we're pulling in historical FMM prices. And so those are the 4 CAISO DLAPs averaged across the 15-minute intervals. And so we use those in this kind of counterfactual analysis. Since we were looking at the first 6 months of the year, you know, we already have what those values are. So we're basically doing a counterfactual of, you know, if we were performing this methodology ahead of time, how well would it do in predicting the FMM price? And because these 6 months have already passed, we can actually compare how well the methodology was versus what the actual price materialized.
Okay, thanks. No, thanks for clarifying that one more time. A couple of observations that I'll make just on the data approach. The first is that a demand load aggregation point to me is not necessarily tracking the issue. The issue is that a resources, so a generator's node, price if you look at the maximum generator node, that is what it needs to cover, right? It's not the demand load aggregation point. It's you have a given node that may have multiple binding constraints impacting its FMM LMP that would be different and can be significantly different than the DLAP. So that's my first piece of feedback, is that remember, this is about, if you're putting a cap on generator offers, you need to look at the generator node LMPs. The other piece of feedback that I would give is that I respect that things are happening super quickly, but I'd ask you to update this analysis for the 10 days from August 31st through September 9th. Again, we need to kind of be focused on, it still needs to be resilient and workable under tight system conditions. And that was, we should look and see what your analysis looks like during those days to see how your values here would differ. Do those 2 pieces of feedback make sense? Or at least not necessarily do you agree, but does it make enough sense that you can take it back and think about it?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Kathleen, for that feedback. Okay. We can consider those.
That sounds great.
I just want to add one piece of context that in the current proposal, we are thinking about some sort of tight system condition threshold with which to essentially turn off this cap. And I don't think we've defined quite yet what exactly that, you know, if that's a flex alert or what sort of level that would be set at, but we are thinking about that.
That's helpful, James. I appreciate that. Yeah. Most of the concerns with managing assets relative to this cap in real time, or I shouldn't say most, but some very significant concerns will come out during times like that. So I think more thought and kind of discussion on that would be helpful. My last question, just trying to understand, is that is your perspective that a coverage of 99%, where let's say 1% of the time, let's say if you get to a place you feel comfortable, 1% of all generator offers are going to be upside down, that is an acceptable amount of offers that are not able to reflect the pricing?
Yeah, and
I
this
just
is
use
kind
it
of
as an example. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. This is kind of what I was discussing with Stuart earlier about the trade-off between, this analysis looking at 97.5 quantile, and would we rather be at 95 or 99? I think is kind of your question, and I went with Stuart the sort of trade-off that obviously at 99, the cap is a little less meaningless or a little less meaningful, but it's still preventing, at least at the extremes, those resources that are really, really, really expensive from sort of offering it's going to have the incentive that it is intended for the really, really expensive resources. And at 95, maybe it's the cap is a little bit more effective in terms of sorting the resources between higher and lower energy cost resources, but maybe it's just too discouraging in terms of what types of offers you'd be getting. And so I think sort of to answer from our perspective, the trade-off is better on the higher side, that we would prefer a little bit higher of a cap for the reasons I just mentioned.
That's helpful. So where our head is that we're concerned that the cap is going to actually drive pricing down in the real time, but not just about pricing. To be frank, it's about the ability to manage your asset appropriately during the real-time operating day. And that, if you are limiting the risk tools that are available to generators, you're actually going to by introducing greater risk in the ability to manage your asset, I do think it distorts the overall market efficiencies and fundamentals. I have to think about what that would do, but this appears to be significantly increasing risk on generators. And just to share with you perspective from a generator owner and operator, even 1% is not something that I feel comfortable with, right? So you might get comfortable with 99% all day, but it doesn't, you're going to limit in some instances, where's my relief? So then you're pushing us down a road of, am I filing at FERC? What am I filing at FERC for relief? Or is there some kind of ex ante relief I can seek at the CAISO? This opens up a big can of worms, but if you're going to limit, you're going to have to provide relief. Thank you.
Okay, Alan?
Hi, Alan Meck, SDG&E. Apologies if this question has already been asked. I just joined right now. But so I'm kind of interested in how the 97.5% regression works in these sort of like really, really high load days like we had last week, like 9/6. I wonder if you compare like 9/6 to like April, for example, does the uncertainty go down as you start to approach those super high days? Because to my mind, the way that it should work is your uncertainty actually starts to go down a little bit, because like it can only get so hot and you can only have so much demand. Does that make sense?
This is James. It makes sense to me. You may have missed the discussion that we would propose. It's not discussed on these slides, but we would propose that, with some definition of tight system conditions in the day-ahead market, we would turn off this cap. So on presumably in last week's heat wave, the cap wouldn't apply. We haven't decided what exact level to set, like a flex alert may be appropriate or something a little more EA1 or I don't know, but we'll decide eventually what level of emergency, I guess, to trigger that.
And can you explain what you mean by remove the cap?
So let's say if we trigger a flex alert, let's say that a flex alert is the trigger for which we remove the cap, purely hypothetical. And the flex alert is between 4 and 9 p.m. the next day. We would, in the day-ahead market, we would not subject, well, in the corresponding real-time market the next day, we would not subject resources to any sort of energy offer cap between 4 and 9 p.m. So thered be some sort of event time frame, corresponding to some sort of emergency action that we would essentially not make this cap binding in the real-time market. Does that help?
Okay, I see what you're saying. I think that maybe I'm asking my question in the wrong section then. That's okay.
Yeah, feel free to follow up with me.
Okay, I'll do that.
About it some more. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, Joshua?
Yes, hi, Josh Arnold, PG&E. First off, thank you for these initial slides. It always helps getting sort of a taste of what's going on with these analyses. You mentioned, though, Katie, that you were going to be publishing a more in-depth, more detailed summary of all this. Do you know when that publishing might happen? Do you know when we can look forward to some more details?
Hey, Josh, thanks for the question. I don't have a specific date for you. I anticipate we would look to put that out prior to the next stakeholder conference, if not sooner. James may have some additional feedback, but yeah, we'll be getting that out and hopefully in short order there.
Great, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to the more in-depth description and documentation, just so it can inform our comments on this more appropriately. But thank you very much for this initial look.
Yeah, and for some additional context, we are careful not to, in Katie's presentation, give the impression we're making any sort of recommendation of what the cap would actually look like and how the methodology would work, but only to provide information on what metrics and how we are going about evaluating the cap, which in Katie's report that we'll publish in the next several weeks, we'll have the full description of all the methods looked at, and we'll eventually, in the proposal, pick one that we think works best and give our rationale, and the companion document can be used to support that. So that's kind of what to expect in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. I think we have one more question on the phone line. Yossi, is there still a question on the phone?
Hi. Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. In the interest of time, I will keep this pretty brief. I get the distinction, or I get the issue that you're trying to address with this real-time energy bid cap and the distinction you're making between the imbalance reserve products and operating reserves. But that being said, I do support the comment I think PowerX made in terms of maybe trying to think of another solution that doesn't involve price or capping bid caps in real time. I think that has a lot of potential to distort market prices. But in addition to that, you offered a solution for when, maybe that bid cap is too low for some resources and they can't reflect their full cost. And that solution, if I am understanding it correctly, is to then price that into their IRU bids. But kind of going back to the conversations at the beginning of this call, you're also proposing to claw back revenues that's associated with the with the IRU bids and not the opportunity cost. So it's like you're proposing a solution to address an issue with this part of that proposal, but then that solution, in my mind, I don't see how that's effective if you're then clawing back the revenues, also exposing that resource to mitigation. So I'm just having a really hard time connecting the dots there on how that will all work out and in the end get the results that you guys are anticipating in terms of being able to allow these resources to reflect that risk through their IRU bids. So I don't know if you have any thought or comments on that. I know we're at the end of the hour here, so I will just, if you want to follow up offline, that's fine too.
I'll just provide a brief response that it's actually a good question, and it mirrors a question that we got in the chat about, the clawback and whether the clawback would include this, I'll call it cost risk or the financial risk of being subject to this cap. There's no way really to distinguish when we receive a bid to know what portion of it is the actual capacity cost and what portion of it is the price risk that they're exposed to. We can potentially, look at things like their default energy bids at certain segments to sort of as a proxy for, would we expect what we would expect their actual cost to be, and that would sort of apply also to the mitigation question as well, which is very important actually, and missing from these slides that, if we are trying for this to be an incentive to increase capacity bids based on real-time risk, and this resource gets mitigated through local market power mitigation, and you wipe away all of the, the price risk that they baked into their bid, well, that's obviously not an appropriate outcome. And so we would have to, we'd probably be looking at the default energy bid as some sort of reference to cost and try to, come up with a way to prevent either the clawback settlement or the mitigation from, taking back that price.
Yeah, taking a big step back, it just sounds like a lot of complex proposal elements to address risks that other complex, potentially unwarranted proposal elements introduce in the first place. And I think when you start going down that road, you end up with a market design that can have a lot of inefficiencies with it and unintended consequences. So I really do think there's a simplified approach to all this. I know we put it in our comments. So I really encourage the CAISO to go back and really think about whether or not all these complex proposal elements are warranted, or if there's a more streamlined approach to address all these concerns that you have. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the comments.
Okay, there's one last question in the chat. It says, the gas market has been very volatile this year. How will this method account for tight gas market conditions?
Yeah, sure. This is Katie. Thanks for that question. And we have definitely seen that this year. So we don't have a specific feature in the regression to account for this, but, essentially what we're doing with the regression is developing sort of a formula based on historical FMM prices, and then from there we plug in the next day gas price to that formula to predict, the energy bid cap or the real-time bid cap. So that's not something we've specifically considered, kind of the movement of the gas market day over day. It's something that we can take back and think about, but the formulation really does, we're plugging in the next day gas price, and so that should reflect, we'll know the gas price around the time that we would be calculating this the morning prior to the trading day. So that would be somewhat considered. Not sure if that answers your question.
Grant, if you have a follow-up question, maybe enter the verbal queue. I see Kathleen raised her hand again. Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks. Just super quickly, Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Callie's question and tying this back to the clawback conversation earlier, just makes me want to be, just share something with the broader stakeholder community and with the CAISO and also make a request. So Imbalance Reserves, just to be clear, Imbalance Reserves is not equivalent to the RA product, and it's not priced in the way that when we were talking about the reliability capacity, which I still just want to call RUC capacity and RUC availability bids, it still works. That is a generic RA obligation. The Imbalance Reserve product is 5-minute dispatchable to meet uncertainty within a 15-minute or 15-minute dispatchable, so the dispatchable resources to meet uncertainty on a 15-minute basis. Flex RA is a 3-hour ramping product, and that is an RA capacity product. But these things are not the same products. They're not the same services. They're not fungible the way that I feel like I'm hearing people talk about. So even in the clawback conversation, I specifically ignored Imbalance Reserves because the notion that we would ever think that Imbalance Reserves revenue should be clawed back because of some misunderstanding that a very novel new product is priced into an RA offer was so unrealistic to me. I didn't want to waste time talking about it early on. But now that I've heard it brought up again and connected to these caps and again connected to the actual product itself, I am unclear how we move forward in a productive way to talk about this design if the core understanding of whether or not Imbalance Reserves is the same thing as Flex RA is unclear. You considering a clawback for the Imbalance Reserve is not rational. And if we need to have that it sounds like we need to have that conversation and get to alignment on that before really getting into all of these detailed mitigation mechanisms that you want to discuss. Until we have clarity that the clawback is not something on Imbalance Reserves that will be moved forward, I think it's really difficult to talk about this as as an entire package. And I just leave you with this last thought. The way that you are talking about this product is that it is introducing so many risks to offer it that I'm struggling to see how the pricing of this product could ever compensate you for the magnitude and compounding risk that you are building into the product. So I leave you with that and ask the CAISO to really think, sounds like you're designing any value out of a product and how that is not productive.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat or in the queue. So I know we are 1 minute past 4 p.m. So I am going to skip ahead to next steps. And I know we didn't get through 2 of the topics that we had scheduled for today, so we will look to schedule a follow-up session sometime, hopefully early next week. But our next steps in terms of publishing a straw proposal is the 4th revised straw proposal on October 6th, and then we would hold a stakeholder call a week after that publication on October 14th with comments due 2 weeks later. And then just a couple reminders, if you have not registered for the Stakeholder Symposium yet, I encourage you to do so. We will be holding it this year on November 9th and 10th in Sacramento at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center. And then also, we do have sponsorship opportunities available, so if you're interested in becoming a symposium sponsor, you can find more information by going to CAISO.com. We'll go to the Stay Informed tab. And then there's a stakeholder symposium page. You'll want to click that. And then more information is available under the sponsors tab. So with that, that concludes today's meeting. I'll just turn it back to James to see if he wanted to add anything before we conclude.
Just wanted to say we really appreciate everybody's time and the discussion. We hope that you find these sort of interim stakeholder conversations helpful, so that we can have some dialogue on some tricky topics before an actual proposal's really released. It does really help our team to get some additional feedback before we go about writing the next proposal. And thanks again for the discussion today.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.